Our key passage for this series is Matthew 1:23. It is the prophecy that was told of the Messiah that would come. It says it like this: the virgin will conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. God with us in the middle of our pain and fear and sadness. God with us in the valleys and on the mountaintops. God with us. Last week, we talked about valleys, those low moments of life. And the reality is most of us don't mind the valleys of life. Sure, they hurt, but at least we know where we are. I'd rather be in a valley than in the wilderness. See, the wilderness is different than the valley. The wilderness is when you don't know where you are and you don't know where God is. It's dry, empty, quiet. It feels endless and lonely. And the truth is that some of us in this room right now are in a wilderness. We feel alone and empty, dried up, and wondering if God still sees me. Or has he gone silent? And so I want to encourage you, if that is you, I hope that you can hear this truth. God does see you. And he's closer than you think. The truth that we're sitting in today, the big idea for us is this: that your greatest, your biggest, deepest need actually becomes a gift when it leads you and drives you to depend on God. Your greatest need, your biggest need, it's a gift. That thing that you want an answer to, that doctor's report you're waiting on, the thing you've been praying and asking God to remove from your life, it actually becomes a gift when it drives you to dependency on God. Not after the wilderness, but in the wilderness moments. See, the wilderness doesn't create our need, but it does expose our need. The prophet Isaiah says it like this in Isaiah 40. He says, the voice cries in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. This was our Advent reading this morning, and the prophecy to a people who weren't rebelling against God. They weren't running from God. No, this is a prophecy spoken to those in exile, tired. They're believing in God, but they're exhausted, wondering if God has forgotten them. And the voice cries in the wilderness, in the midst of their emptiness, prepare a way for the Lord. It's in the middle of their lostness. If you think about it, the announcement for the Messiah, the answer to the rescue plan for the entire world, it begins in the wilderness. God doesn't announce a rescue to people who feel strong. He announces a rescue to people who are stranded, because that's exactly where we need him the most. So a voice cries in your wilderness, get ready. Prepare the way. That God is doing a new thing. He's coming. And you can see this pattern all over the Bible. Jesus, when he's baptized, and then this mountaintop experience, the heavens open up and the Spirit descends and God affirms his Son. And then immediately in Matthew 4, it says that he is led into the wilderness for 40 days. That the wilderness is part of the process. Or David, the little shepherd boy who stood in a valley to slay a giant, who would later run for his life, hiding out in the wilderness, hiding and living in caves as the king Saul is trying to hunt his life. He's unsure if he'll survive, and he pens and writes psalms that comfort us centuries later. Or the Israelite people who wander in the wilderness for 40 years. No food, no water, nothing to rely on but God. They had to learn dependency the hard way. Different historical accounts, but the same lesson. That the wilderness is what confronts our limits. The wilderness exposes our deepest need, and it drives us to dependency on God. And maybe that's where you're at today. You feel spiritually dry, disappointed in God even, emotionally exhausted, relationally isolated, wondering if God sees you, wondering if he cares. And I'm here to tell you right now, he does. He does see you. He does care about you. He knows what you're going through. And it is your deepest need, that moment of your life, that becomes a gift when it drives you to depend on God. Last week I was driving in my truck and had one of these moments where God just impressed on my heart, what am I actually known for? One of those existential moments. What am I actually known for? Because a lot of people, they get to see my hobbies. A lot of people get to see what I'm interested in. In fact, I've got some people, whether you agree with them or not, I've had some people come to me and say, Kip, you're such like a man's man. You're like a guy's guy. Like whatever that means. Maybe it's the beard. Maybe it's that I like to wear flannel. Maybe that it's because I always have a knife on me, or I've got more guns than I have fingers, or that I like to smoke cigars or the occasional bourbon, although I haven't had any alcohol in the last 3 months. As about 3 months ago, God just impressed on me, hey, I want you to step back from that for a season. Maybe it's because I like to work with my hands and build things, or because I have a truck or ride a motorcycle, or I don't know what it is, whatever it, and listen, none of that is bad. But here's the thing. None of that defines who I am. None of it's bad, but none of it defines who I am. And God reminded me that if he took all of it away, I wouldn't lose who I am. I'd finally see what I actually depend on. That's what the wilderness does. It strips away the distractions. It exposes what really matters. It reveals the truth in the midst of our deepest needs and our fear and our loneliness, our brokenness or disappointments. They become a gift when they drive us to depend on God. But if we're honest, many of us would rather run to our hobbies, our accomplishments, our self-image, our distractions, not because those things define us, but because they help us avoid the empty space inside of us. And here's the truth that you can write down if you're taking notes. The wilderness reveals what I actually can't carry alone. The wilderness strips back the curtain and it reveals what I lack, what I can't do on my own, my need. Real talk. If I had none of those things, no guns, no knives, no beard, no truck, no motorcycle, I would still have everything that truly matters. Because my identity is not in those things. My identity is in Christ. He defines me. And just like I was confronted with what I depend on, Elijah, the prophet, is confronted in the wilderness with the very same thing. See, sometimes even the people that God uses the most face a wilderness that strips them down to nothing. And like them, we get to learn our limits and our needs. And so in 1 Kings 19, we pick up the story of Elijah. And I've taught this passage over and over. I've taught this passage a ton, and I've got a whole breakdown of how when we run from God and we end up in these depressed moments, the path to come back out of that. But this message is not that. In 1 Kings 19, we see that Elijah had just finished this mountaintop moment. He had a showdown with King Ahab and the false prophets of Baal. And fire falls from heaven. There's like this mountain shaking, and God's power is undeniable. It's this awesome moment. And then right after that, Elijah gets word that Jezebel, this evil witch of a queen, wants to kill him. And so what does Elijah do? He runs. Terrified, afraid. I mean, he pulls a Forrest Gump, and he runs 100 miles away. He leaves his servant behind. He ends up in the wilderness under a broom tree, asking God to take his life. Just end it. I'm done. I want out. I can't do it anymore. And it is there, right in the middle of nowhere, that God shows up for Elijah. And listen, you don't have to run from God. to find yourself in a wilderness place. But every time you do run from God, there's really no other place you'll end up but in the wilderness. And this is what happens to Elijah. He ran, he ends up in the wilderness. 1 Kings 19, verse 4 says it like this. Elijah's like, I've had enough. Take my life. God, take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. I'm no better than my fathers. I'm no better than those who came before me. And you know what Elijah's actually saying? It's not just, I'm afraid of this woman who wants to kill me, because I just end it now. What he's actually saying is, God, I'm disappointed in you. God, you haven't kept your part. God, you called me to lead these people, and they are still denying you. They're still running from you. Nothing's really changed. So just take my life. I'm no better than those who came before me. Just end it all. Sound familiar? Like when you've tried to do everything you can to do the right thing, but life still smacks you upside the head? Fear, exhaustion, disappointment. And you're just like, I'm done. Throw in the towel. I've had enough. That's the wilderness. And God meets Elijah in his wilderness. First, he meets him with provision. Verses 11 through 13 say that God feeds Elijah before correcting him. First, he brings an angel to bring bread and water, because sometimes, and I love this, sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is eat a snack and take a nap, right? I'm looking forward to that this afternoon. But then God shows up with presents. Not like Christmas presents, but with his very present self. Showing up and revealing on Mount Horeb, or also known as Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. This is the mountain where God has shown up to Moses to give the 10 Commandments, and fire came from heaven, and the mountain shook, and it burned the top of the mountain, and the Israelites are terrified. But God shows up in the same place, but in a very different way. This time when God shows up, he's not in the power of the wind or the earthquake or the fire, because he's not trying to impress Elijah. He's trying to heal Elijah. And so when he comes in a gentle whisper. See, God doesn't always shout over the noise of your life, but he will whisper into the needs of your life. And your deepest need, that despair, that fear, that discouragement, it becomes a gift when it drives you to depend on God. Because the wilderness, it's not punishment, it's preparation. It's preparing you for something more. And God met Elijah there, and he gave him exactly what he needed: some bread, some water, a nap, and then a gentle whisper of his presence. And God says in verse 13, "What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here?" In other words, what are you doing in isolation? What are you doing afraid? What are you doing depressed? What are you doing disappointed and throwing a little temper tantrum? What are you doing running to the middle of nowhere? In Elijah's wilderness, it's not just about surviving. It was about encountering God in the middle of his weakness. The second truth you can write down is that the wilderness is where God meets us most personally. When we feel most alone, when we feel the most distant, this is where God meets us very personally. What has been your wilderness moments throughout your life? Maybe it was the loss of a loved one. Maybe the heartbreak of a miscarriage, a child running from God, the heartbreak of a marriage ending. Maybe it's feeling isolated or rejected, unloved, ready to give up. What happens when God shows up in the middle of your wilderness, in the middle of nowhere, when this feels like your life? I'm nowhere. God's nowhere. Life is nothing. I'm done. What happens when God shows up in the middle of your trouble, in the middle of your discouragement, in the middle of your... It's in the desert where God's presence becomes everything. Where he's all I need. See, when God shows up in the middle of nowhere, what we realize, I told you I always carry a knife on me. What we understand when God shows up in the middle of nowhere is that he is now here. In the middle of my wilderness, in the middle of my brokenness, in the middle of my pain and devastation, in the middle of my trouble, he is a very present, real help in my time of trouble. What happens when God shows up in the middle of nowhere? I find that he's faithful and that he will never leave me. And God was with Elijah under the broom tree. See, Emmanuel means God with us, even in the wilderness. God with Elijah under the broom tree, God with you in the middle of your panic attack, in the middle of your heartbreak, in the middle of the doctor's report, in the middle of your empty bedroom, in the middle of the quiet drive home alone. When everything else is stripped away, you finally hear the whisper right beside you as he steps into the middle of your wilderness, whether you chose it or not, whether you understand what the wilderness is or when you see that you're not strong enough to handle it alone. Emmanuel means God moves into the middle and he carries the weight. He whispers the truth. He becomes living water when everything else is dried up. And just like Elijah, God meets us in our deepest need, not to shame you, but to strengthen you. And so often the church gets a bad rap because people don't even want to walk in here because, well, if you knew what I did, if you knew what's been done to me, I'm broken, I'm used goods, I'm hopeless and worthless. Listen, when God shows up in the middle of your wilderness, it's not to shame you, it's to strengthen you. It's not to point fingers and judge you, but it's to draw you close. It's not to leave us in the wilderness, it's to lead us through the wilderness. But here's the deal. The wilderness, it doesn't always look like running for your life from some crazy queen. Sometimes it's relational, sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's spiritual. Sometimes it's just feeling completely alone and thirsty for something to satisfy the emptiness of your heart. And Elijah shows us that God meets us in our fears and our disappointments, but what about our shame? What about the isolation that you didn't choose, or the isolation maybe you did choose it? Well, look at how Jesus shows up and meets this woman in the middle of her wilderness. In John chapter 4, this is the last passage we're looking at today. John chapter 4, Jesus shows up to this woman at the well. And I love how it's kind of laid out for us. Starting in verse 1, it says, "Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John the Baptist, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples did, it says that he left Judea and departed again for Galilee." Verse 4, "And he had to pass through Samaria." Here's the crazy thing. He didn't really have to pass through Samaria. In fact, most Jews avoided Samaria. They went around Samaria. They would travel twice as far mileage-wise just to avoid going through Samaria because Jews and Samaritans were like, I don't know, it's like Bears and Packers fans. Like you don't, like, but worse. They were arch enemies. They hated one another. They didn't even want to be around one another. And here it says that, but Jesus had to pass through Samaria because he knew that at the right moment that he got there was going to be a woman who felt like she was in the middle of nowhere and Jesus was going to show up in the middle of her wilderness. So he came, verse 5, to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field of Jacob, that had been given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, weary as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour of the day, which means it was noon. It was like the hottest part of the day. And a woman from Samaria came to draw water. And Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone into the city to buy food. And the Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. If you picture it, it's the middle of the day, and by the way, in Jesus' day, you didn't go get water in the middle of the day. It was a hard enough job. You didn't make it harder by going when the sun is like melting your skin. So the women would go in the morning. In the cool of the morning, they would go together like they go to the bathroom, right? But they all went to the well together. It was a social outing. It was in the cool of the day, but not this woman. She goes alone, by herself. She wasn't part of the group. She walks to the well carrying empty jars for water as well as an empty identity because she was lost and rejected. Why is she alone? Because society had pushed her out. People had judged her. Life had been hard because she knows what it feels like to thirst, more than just physically, but to thirst emotionally, spiritually, relationally. And so this is where Jesus shows up. He doesn't just wait for her to clean her life up. He doesn't lecture her on her mistakes, although he reveals to her that he knows them. At one point he says, hey, go get your husband. And she's like, I don't have a husband. He's like, you're right. You've had 5. And the guy you're with now, he's not your husband. And Jesus doesn't reveal that to shame her or like put her down, but to reveal that he has something more for her. He meets her in the middle of her wilderness right there, and he says, would you give me a drink? Now, here's the crazy part. To a woman who had been judged and isolated, who felt no value or worth, Jesus' request actually speaks value and dignity to a woman that only felt condemned. See, she had something to give him. She had a way to draw water to quench his physical thirst. But Jesus is about to turn it all around on her. See, Jesus crosses gender and racial boundaries and enters into her wilderness to give her what her heart longs for the most. Verses 10 through 15 is where Jesus begins to shift the script, so to speak, and he says, listen, if you were to ask me for water, I'd give you living water. Water that doesn't run out. Water that quenches the thirst deeper than a physical thirst. The kind of water that fills the cracks of your heart, the longings that you ignore, the emptiness that nothing else can touch. I would give you water that's like an oasis in the desert that never runs out. See, this woman, she came with questions and doubts and fears, and Jesus comes with answers. She came with shame, and he comes with hope. She came with loneliness, and he comes with his presence. She comes with brokenness, and he comes full of love and grace. And what we see in this interaction with Jesus and the woman at the well is what we see in Isaiah 43. Check out Isaiah 43. It says it like this: remember not the former things, nor consider the things of old. In other words, hey, stop focusing on your past mistakes. Stop focusing on how things used to be. That's not what is happening anymore. You're not defined by your past. You're not defined by your mistakes. You're not defined by what once was. Behold, I'm doing a new thing. And now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? Do you not see it coming? I'm going to make a way in the wilderness. I'm going to come into the middle of your nowhere. I'm going to make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. And this is what Jesus is doing for this woman. In the middle of her wilderness moment, Jesus brings a river of hope that revives her soul. The third truth for us, you can write this down, is that the wilderness becomes the place where God turns our needs into a gift. So often we don't see our greatest need as a gift until we get into the wilderness, and it drives us to depend on God. The very thing that kept this woman isolated, the judgment and the being treated like she was, and so she isolates and goes and gets water alone, and it was the very thing that drew her dependency onto Jesus. Verse 28 says that she leaves her water jars behind. They were a symbol of her old life. And she runs into town to all those people that had judged her and but she couldn't keep the good news inside. Verse 29 says she gets into the town and she says, "Come and see a man who told me all that I've ever done. Can this be the Christ?" See, when God shows up in your life, in the middle of your wilderness, in the middle of your loneliness, and when he changes you and he changes that need into a gift to dependency on God, we're called to share that with others. That testimony is what can help others in the midst of their valley, in the midst of their wilderness wandering, and point them to Jesus. Let me tell you about the man who told me all that I've ever done. And they're like, "We know what you've done." And she's like, "I know." And he knew, and he loved me anyways. And he wants me, and he wants you. And when we understand what he's done and what he can do, we can't help but testify to it. Listen, you and I are the woman at the well. We are the ones who are broken and scarred, shamed by our divorce, shamed by our addiction, our debt, our fear, our failure, that abortion that we had, our lusts, our lies, our loss. We're the one that feels like we're not good enough, but God shows up in the middle of those moments and he does a new thing. He makes a way in the wilderness of our soul. And like Elijah and like the woman at the well, your wilderness is not a dead end. When it seems like God is nowhere to be found, that's the place where God meets you. That's the place where God whispers his truth, pours out living water, makes rivers in the wilderness, and equips you not to just survive, but to carry that living water to others around you. As I get ready to close, I want to share a story that I heard this week. It's from the book, The Hiding Place. It's a story about Corrie ten Boom and her sister Betsy, her family that during World War II, they were hiding Jews from the Nazis in their home. Their house was raided and they were all taken to the concentration camps, arguably one of the darkest wildernesses imaginable. And at one point, Corrie and her sister Betsy, they're transferred to another concentration camp into cell block 28. And that first night that they're in cell block 28, Corrie realizes she can't sleep. And she's had it. She can't sleep because cell block 28 was infested with fleas. It was Corrie's breaking point. She turned to her sister Betsy and said, "I can't do it. I can't take it anymore. I can't do this." Her sister Betsy ended up dying in the concentration camp, but Corrie, in the book, records her sister Betsy saying, "You know what? I know what to do." I actually read it in my Bible last night. 1 Thessalonians 5 says, "Rejoice always. Pray without ceasing, and give thanks in all circumstances." And Betsy said to her sister, she said, "Corrie, you know what? What if we just paused right now and gave thanks? What if we thank God for the guards outside? What if we thank God that we're in this cell block with these ladies that we'll get to share the gospel with? Why don't we thank God for the beds that we're sleeping in? Why don't we thank God, Corrie, why don't we thank God for the fleas?" And Corrie's like, "I'm not doing that." Betsy's like, "Yes, you are." A few months later, they had started a Bible study in cell block 28, and it was growing, growing and growing. They were doing worship services in cell block 28, which was illegal in Nazi concentration camps. And they always wondered why the guards never came in to stop them, and they never found out why. Until the war ended and they were leaving the concentration camp, one of them turned and asked the guard, "Why did you never stop us?" And the guard looked at him and said, "The guards would never go into cell block 28 for one reason: because of the fleas." See, sometimes the thing you're asking God to remove from your life is the very thing he's using to redeem you and others around you. And the truth is if you are going through some things right now, if you're afraid, if it feels like you're in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the wilderness, can I just tell you this? God is with you. He wants you. He is for you. He is working all circumstances for your good and His glory for those who are called according to His purposes. And your deepest need is the gift that drives you to depend on God and allows you to see Him work in ways you never thought possible. I promise you, the wilderness that you're in, it is not the end. It is a place where God will meet you. He will expose your limits, and He will drive you to dependency on Him. Right now, maybe you're in the wilderness, spiritually dry, emotionally drained, lonely and afraid. And God is whispering His presence to you right now. I'm with you. I see you. You're not alone, and I will never leave you or forsake you. See, what if the wilderness isn't where God abandons you? What if it's where He forms you? An invitation to expose your need and depend on Him. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call His name Emmanuel, which means God with us, even in the wilderness. We've talked a lot today about the wilderness and those moments of feeling empty and exhausted, ashamed and alone. But the greatest wilderness of humanity has been the wilderness of sin. The separation between us and our Creator God. And Jesus stepped into the wilderness too, to take our place. Emmanuel, God with us, became God for us. And it was on the cross where He carried what we could not carry on our own. It was on the cross that He paid the debt we could not afford. It was on the cross that He made a way where there was no other way.